Chapter 29, the second part. There was no discrepancy of years between Estella and I, to remove her far from me. We were nearly of the same age, though of course the age told far more in her case than in mine. But the air of inaccessibility which her beauty and her manner gave her tormented me in the midst of my delight, and at the height of the assurance I felt that our patroness had chosen us for one another. Wretched boy! We had finished our walk and we went back into the house, and there I heard with surprise that my guardian had come down to see Miss Havisham on business and would come back for dinner. The old wintry branches of the chandeliers were lit. The same mouldering table was spread, and Miss Havisham was back in her chair, waiting for me. It was like pushing the chair itself back into the past when we began the slow circuit around the ashes of the bridal feast. But in the funereal room, with that figure of the grave fallen back in the dust, fixing its eyes upon me, Estella looked more bright and beautiful than before, and I was under stronger enchantment. The time so melted away that our early dinner hour drew close at hand, and Estella left to prepare herself. We had stopped near the centre of the long table, and Miss Havisham, with one of her withered arms, stretched out of the chair and rested that clenched hand upon the yellow cloth. As Estella looked back over her shoulder before going out at the door, Miss Havisham kissed the hand with a ravenous intensity that was, of its kind, quite dreadful. Then, Estella being gone, and we two left alone, she turned to me and said in a whisper, "Is she beautiful, graceful, well grown? Do you admire her?" "Everybody must who sees her, Miss Havisham." She drew her arm around my neck, drew my head close down to hers as she sat in the chair. "Love her, love her, love her. How does she use you?" Before I could answer, if I could have answered so difficult a question, she repeated, "Love her, love her, love her. If she favours you, love her. If she wounds you, love her. If she tears your heart to pieces, and as it gets older and stronger, it will tear deeper, love her, love her, love her." Never had I seen such passionate eagerness as was joined to her utterance of these words. I could feel the muscles of the thin arm round my neck swell with the very vehemence that possessed her. "Hear me, Pip. I adopted her to be loved. I bred her and educated her to be loved. I developed her into what she is, that she might be loved. Love her." She said the word often enough, and there could be no doubt that she meant it. But if the oft-repeated word had been hate instead of love, despair, revenge, dire death, it could not have sounded from her lips more like a curse. "I tell you," she said in the same hurried, passionate whisper. I tell you what real love is. It is blind devotion, unquestioning self-humiliation, utter submission, trust and belief against yourself and against the whole world, giving up your heart and soul to the smiter, as I did. When she came to that, she uttered a wild cry that followed it, and I caught her round the waist, for she'd risen up in her chair and her shroud dress, and struck at the air as if she would have struck herself against the wall and fallen dead. All this passed in a few seconds. As I drew her down into the chair, I was conscious of a scent I knew, and turning, I saw my guardian in the room. He always carried, I haven't yet mentioned it, I think, a pocket handkerchief of rich silk and of imposing proportions, which was of great value to him in his profession. I have seen him so terrify a client or a witness by ceremoniously unfolding this pocket handkerchief, as if he knew he should not have had time to do it before the client or the witness committed himself, that the self-committal would be followed directly and quite as a matter of course. When I saw him in the room, he had this expressive pocket handkerchief in both hands and was looking at us. On meeting my eye, he had plainly, in a momentary and silent pause in that attitude, whispered, "Indeed, singular." Miss Havisham had seen him as soon as I saw him, and was, like everybody else, afraid of him. She made a strong attempt to compose herself and stammered that he was as punctual as ever. "As punctual as ever," he repeated, coming up to us. "How d'ye do, Pip? Shall I give you a ride, Miss Havisham? Once round? And so you are here, Pip?" I told him when I arrived and how Miss Havisham had wished me to come and see Estella, to which he replied, "Ah, very fine young woman." Then he pushed Miss Havisham in her chair before him with one of his large hands and the other in his trouser pocket, as if it were full of secrets. "Well, Pip, how often have you seen Miss Estella before?" said he, when he came to a stop. "How often?" "Yes, how many times?" 10,000 times?" "Oh, certainly not as many." "Twice?" "Jaggers," interposed Miss Havisham, much to my relief, "leave my Pip alone, and go with him to your dinner." He complied, and we groped our way down the long stairs together. While we were still on our way to those detached apartments across the paved yard at the back, he asked me how many times I had seen Miss Havisham eat and drink, offering me a breadth of choice as usual between 100 times and once. I considered and said, "Never." "And you never will, Pip," he retorted with a frowning smile. "She has never allowed herself to be seen doing either. Since she lived in this present life of hers, she wanders about in the night, and then lays hands on such food as she takes." "Pray, sir," said I, "may I ask you a question?" "You may," said he, "and I may decline to answer it. Put your question." "Estella's name, is it Havisham, sir? Or—" I had nothing to add. "Or what?" said he. "Is it Havisham?" "It is Havisham." This brought us to the dinner table, where she and Sarah Pocket awaited us. Mr. Jaggers presided, Estella sat opposite him, I faced my green and yellow friend. We dined very well, and were waited on by a maidservant whom I had never seen in all my coming and going, but who, for that anything I knew, had been in that mysterious house for the whole time. After dinner, a bottle of choice old port was placed before my guardian. He was evidently well acquainted with the vintage, and the two ladies left us. Anything to equal the determined reticence of Mr. Jaggers under that roof I have never seen elsewhere, even in him. He kept his very looks to himself, and scarcely directed his eyes to Estella's face once during the dinner. When she spoke to him, he listened, and in due course answered, but never looked at her that I could see. On the other hand, she often looked at him with interest and curiosity, if not distrust. But his face never showed the least consciousness. Throughout dinner he took a dry delight in making Sarah Pocket greener and yellower by often referring in conversation with me to my expectations. But here again he showed no consciousness, and even made it appear that he extorted, and even did extort, though I don't know how, those references out of my innocent self. And when he and I were left alone together, we sat with an air upon him of generally lying in by the consequence of information he possessed. And that was really too much for me. He cross-examined his very wine when he had nothing else in his hand. He held it between himself and the candle, tasted the port, rolled it around in his mouth, swallowed it, looked at his glass again, smelt the port, tried it, drank it, filled it again, cross-examined the glass again, until I was so nervous, as if it had been the wine telling him something about me to my disadvantage. 3 or 4 times I feebly thought that I would start the conversation, but whenever he saw me going to ask him anything, he looked at me with his glass in his hand and rolling his wine around in his mouth, as if requesting me to take notice of the use of the wine. For he could answer me no questions. I think Miss Pocket was conscious that the sight of me involved her in the danger of being goaded to madness, and perhaps of tearing off her cap, which was a very hideous one in the nature of a muslin mop, and strewing the ground with her hair, which assuredly had never grown on her head. She did not appear when we afterwards went up to Miss Havisham's room, and we 4 played at whist. In the interval, Miss Havisham, in a fantastic way, had put some of the most beautiful jewels from her dressing-table into Estella's hair and about her bosom and arm, and I saw my guardian look at her from under his thick eyebrows and raise them a little when her loveliness was before him, with those rich flushes of glitter and colour in it. We played until 9 o'clock, and then it was arranged that when Estella came to London, I should be forewarned of her coming and should meet her at the coach. And then I took leave of her and touched her and left her. My guardian lay at the bore in the next room to mine. Far into the night, Miss Havisham's words, "Love her, love her, love her," sounded in my ears. I adapted them for my own repetition and said to my pillow, "I love her, I love her, I love her," hundreds of times. Then a burst of gratitude came upon me that she should be destined for me, once the blacksmith's boy. Then I thought if she were, as I feared, by no means rapturously grateful for that tendency yet, when would that tendency begin? When would she be interested in me? When should I awaken the heart within her that was mute and sleeping now. Ah me, I thought those were high and great emotions, but I never thought there was anything low and small in my keeping away from Jo, because I knew she would be contemptuous of him. It was but a day gone, and Jo brought the tears into my eyes. But they were soon dried. God forgive me. Soon dried.